Yep. All right. Okay, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been joking with people about, they ask about the 2012 thing and, what's going to happen. I basically say I can't wait until 2013, so people will stop asking me about that. Oh, do you need a mic to hear me back there? Can you guys hear me, Pam? No? Okay. I guess I will use the mic then. Okay. Whoops. All right, is that better? Can you guys hear me back there? All right. Okay. So now in order to understand the Maya, you can't look at the Maya in isolation. They're part of a larger Mesoamerican culture. Now when we talk about Mesoamerica, it doesn't really have fixed geographic or even chronological boundaries, but generally speaking, it goes from the area of central Mexico down to northern Honduras, down to Copan. And then this is kind of the core area in the Maya period. But chronologically, the first great civilization is here in the Olmec heartland. And from there, we see a later flourishing in the Maya area, and then later in the Valley of Mexico with the Aztec. And that's a gross oversimplification of Mesoamerica. And oftentimes people just kind of think in terms of Olmec, Maya, Aztec. But when we take a closer look at Mesoamerica, we realize there's a great amount of cultural diversity. Scores of different cultures, speaking different languages, holding different belief systems, worshiping different gods, etc., over space and time. But this diversity is important in understanding this Maya, the 2012 phenomenon. The Maya were not, well, we'll go through and look at the way the different cultures have kind of influenced this 2012 concept. Now, I pulled a few things off of Facebook here as we go through this. And so let's see, this, so you think the world's going to end in 2012 because the Mayan said so. Tell me more about the other Mayan gods, rituals, and mythology you believe in. And this, I think, it kind of illustrates a point, that we kind of take things out of context, look at them in isolation, and say, oh, the Maya said that? You're kidding me. And a lot of people are actually very genuinely concerned about this. NASA's been getting a lot of emails from people, very genuinely concerned. And tragically, I think it was just in the last month or two, a young girl, I think it was in England, committed suicide because she was so concerned about the end of the world. One of the problems we see is taking things out of context. Now, an important distinction we need to draw is between Mayanism and genuine Mayan studies. I've sort of coined a term here. Actually, I was aided by a friend and colleague of mine named John Hoops. About a month ago, I was giving a similar presentation, and I was trying to find a term that describes people that aren't Mayanists, but that are proponents of this kind of 2012 phenomenon. And we decided we like the term Mayanologer. Kind of harkens like astrologers. They try to sound like they know what they're talking about, but when it comes down to it, it's sort of a bunch of hocus pocus. And so when we talk about Mayanism, this is the non-codified, eclectic collection of New Age beliefs, influenced in part by pre-Columbian Maya mythology and some folk beliefs of the modern Maya people. And more often than not, they're integrating other Eastern religions. It's just really kind of this hodgepodge of beliefs that they hold to that doesn't really reflect what the Maya people themselves believed, either anciently or modernly, or in modern times. Now we contrast this with Mayanists. I'm a Mayanist. Mayanists are trained scholars. We pull from a wide variety of disciplines such as archaeology, linguistics, epigraphy, ethnography, etc., etc., etc. And we see what the data really can tell us about the Maya, both ancient and modern. And when we use the methodology of true Maya scholarship, we realize that there's nothing to these 2012 prophecies, so to speak. Now, some of the more prominent 2012 claims is that there's going to be some kind of a shift or reversal in the Earth's magnetic poles, and that's going to cause chaos with our computers, with our data centers, or that there's going to be some galactic alignment or a solar maximum. The sun's going to somehow be exuding more energy. a harmonic convergence. So some say it's going to be catastrophe, and on the other extreme you have this new era of world consciousness, this era of peace and global harmony. Some have said that there will be the return of Quetzalcoatl. And I'm going to go through some of these and show you why they all kind of fall short when we actually look at what the data say. Now here are some reasons why we should doubt virtually any claim you've heard about any of the things I just mentioned above. One is that there's really not a whole lot of evidence. From the classic Maya period, for example, there's only 2 known inscriptions, and one of those we just discovered earlier this year by a stroke of luck, more than anything. And then with the ancient sources, there's actually a lot of variations. There's a lot of contradictions between cultures and even within cultures. And oftentimes ancient dates could be manipulated for political purposes. And we sometimes see the same thing today, but if a king was born on an inauspicious day, for example, an inauspicious day would be something for us like Friday the 13th. You can kind of fudge the dates a little bit. Or if you want to make it seem like you conquered a city on a particularly auspicious day, you could change the dates a little bit. We also suffer, number 4, from presentism. That's when we project our current worldview on theirs. Well, if I was a Maya, I would have done things this way. We assume that they're living by the same cultural norms that we're living by today, and you can't do that. We suffer from thinking like gringos, unfortunately, when we study the ancient Maya. And then sometimes there are ancient scribal errors, even in the dates. They'll write a date down, and we know it's an error because it's an impossible date. So if I were to say, I'll meet you on February 30th, it wouldn't make sense. It's a date that's impossible in our system. And in their system, there are certain dates that are impossible. And for them, once they etched it in stone, they would literally engrave it in stone. I mean, what's done is done. They don't have a delete button. Once it's in stone, it's there forever. And there's no evidence of a scribe ever trying to correct an error once it was made. And then number 6, most importantly, there's not a single ancient text that mentions either destruction or renewal in 2012. Not one. There are 2 that mention the date, but those 2 don't mention anything about destruction or renewal or anything in between. And we'll talk about what the texts actually do say a little bit later. And then number 7 here, we've got several ancient texts that indicate that the world and the calendar are going to continue far beyond 2012. So we've got 2 monuments that mention the 2012 date, but we've got other monuments that mention dates farther into the future, and we'll talk about those in a little bit as well. Number 8, there's this concept that the Maya had this cyclic time, that there were periods of creation and renewal, and then destruction, and then creation and renewal again, and then destruction, and that has to happen forever. And that's actually not a true concept. There's not good evidence for that. And then finally, a big deal is being made of the fact that December 21st is a solstice day, and that somehow the Maya predicted this. But I'm going to show you that the solstices really weren't all that special to them, and there's really no other mentions of solstices in the texts. So here's one proponent, Mayanologer, I'll call him. His name's John Major Jenkins. And this is kind of the stuff that we're dealing with here as Mayanists. This is one of those myths that we're trying to debunk. He says on the galactic level, the Milky Way's equator, like the Earth's equator, is a field effect dividing line. As with a spinning magnetic top, the field effects on one side are different from those on the other. And Maya insights offer us the notion that a field effect reversal occurs when the solstice meridian crosses over this line. Now the first thing I'll point out is I speak a little Mayan, and I don't think they have any words for field effect reversal. Right? It's not a concept they even have ever thought of. Well, NASA, I'll let them explain this. There is nothing in the millions of years of geologic record to suggest that any of the 2012 doomsday scenarios connected with a pole reversal should be taken seriously. In other words, what he's suggesting is that somehow the magnetic poles are going to flip. North is going to become south, south is going to become north, and in this process, all of your data is going to be lost, all the computer hard drives will be wiped out, and we're going to be, reset back to the Stone Ages. There's no evidence for that. The Earth's poles have flipped before, but it's a geologic process. It takes millions, hundreds of millions of years for that to happen. It doesn't happen in an instant, and it's not going to happen on December 21st. Here's another one. This guy's name is Daniel Pinchbeck. He is a Mayanologer. He's a New Age guru, and he's also a big fan of psychotropic plants. In other words, the plants that get you really, really high. I just saw an interview with him yesterday. He was on a TV show with Russell Brand. I don't know if you know who he is. He's that lanky English fella. And they just got on this really great conversation about how they loved getting high. So that's where this guy's coming from. And here's what he says. At the moment of the alignments, we cross the galactic equator. He's talking about what's going to happen on the 21st. The precise edge of our spiraling galaxy, ushering in a new world age whose effects will be realized as a transformation of consciousness. Well, what is he talking about here with this galactic equator? Well, there is a galactic equator, but is it a rare event? No. It happens all the time. In fact, just since we've been crossing over it every year, every winter solstice, which is what we're approaching here in December, every year since 1983, and it's going to continue to cross that every year until 2019. Well, that's kind of special, right? We're in this 30 or 40 year window. But it happened back in 1941. It happened back in 1870. This is not a unique event. It happens regularly, and the world hasn't ended, right? So again, this whole concept just falls apart. So here's what I've been hearing a lot recently too. Since the Mayan calendar didn't account for leap year, shouldn't we have all died like 7 months ago? In fact, Tyler back there brought this one up when we ran into him at the Riverwoods the other night. Well, I'll turn to Dwight Schrute to refute this one. It says false. The Mayan hieroglyphs were translated in accordance with the modern day calendar. And that's actually true. Dwight got that right. So here's how we calculated it, right? We know that the long count began on August 13th of 3114 BC. It's always easy for me to remember that because it's my wife's birthday. I mean, she wasn't born in 3114 BC, obviously, but the August 13th part. And we know how the Gregorian calendar works, the calendar that we currently use, and we know how many leap years there were. And what we do is we actually count the days. And there have been 1,872,000 days starting from August 13th, 3114 BC. And you count those days, and then you end up on December 21st or 23rd. I'm going to use 21st and 23rd interchangeably because even among Mayanists, there's a debate as to the exact correlation. So some Mayanists will say it was August 11th, 3114 BC, and it'll end on December 21st. Others will say it was August 13th and ends on December 23rd. I favor the 13th, just so I can remember my wife's birthday, but there actually is better evidence for it. In fact, just in the last week or two, a new article was published by Simon Martin and Joel Skidmore, where they suggest that even those may be off by a couple of days, and that's something that we're still, I guess, researching. So we've been debating this correlation for about 100 years now, but it's close enough. Okay, so what about the winter solstice? It is pretty interesting that, back in the mid 7th century AD, the Mayans mentioned a date that happened to be a winter solstice in the year 2012. Did they do it on purpose? Probably not. We have thousands of known inscriptions, and none of them actually make a specific note of the occurrence of a solstice. Some of the buildings do seem to be oriented to solstices and equinoxes, but when it comes to, let's say, a king wanting to exceed on a certain date, we have, I think, 2 known inscriptions where a king happened to exceed on a solstice date. But we've got, I think, at least 4 where he exceeds on a February 14th. So by that logic, he was celebrating Valentine's Day twice as often as Solstice Day. In other words, the number of times that it happens on a solstice is the exact number of times that chance would predict. So there's no evidence that the solstices were important dates to them as far as the inscriptions go or as far as marking them. There are no other prophecies where they would say on such and such a date it will be a solstice. So it's really what it comes down to is coincidence that it's going to be a solstice. So where do these theories stem from? As much as I'd like to throw all of the blame on New Agers, I'm afraid we can't do that. A lot of it does fall on we Mayanists. One of our great Mayanists, Michael Coe, he's my academic grandfather, which means he was my dissertation advisor's advisor when he was going through grad school. In his first edition of the book, the Maya, which is the standard textbook for undergraduates studying the Maya, he says there is a suggestion that Armageddon would overtake the degenerate peoples of the world and all creation on the final day of the 13th Baktun. That's what's going to happen on the 21st, by the way. It's the 13th Baktun. Thus, our present universe would be annihilated on December 23rd, 2012, when the great cycle of the long count reaches completion. Now, unfortunately, Michael Coe said this, it's in print, and it's sort of there forever for people to read. Now, where did he get these ideas? That there would be sort of this apocalypse, this Armageddon. Well, we actually need to turn to the Aztec. Now again, the Aztec are a different people, a different culture than the Maya were. They're separated by hundreds of miles, they're separated by centuries. The classic Maya period collapsed around 900 AD, give or take, and the Aztecs don't begin to come into play until 1300 AD, so centuries later. Now there are some shared cultural traditions between the Aztec and earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they're not exactly the same. So you can't say, well, the Aztecs believe this, therefore the Maya must have believed that, and therefore the Olmec must have believed this, right? There's diversity. Yes, there are shared origins, but there's a great deal of diversity. And so the red's getting kind of washed out a little bit here, but that's okay. So this is what's commonly known as the Aztec calendar stone. It's really the Mexica sunstone, but we'll let that slide for now. But we have this legend of the 5 suns from Leyenda de los Soles. It's an Aztec manuscript. And it talks about 4 prior world creations. The first was a 4 jaguar. That was the first sun, was named 4 jaguar. It lasted 676 years. Why 676 years? Because it's 13 cycles of 52 years. For them, the 52-year cycle, that was their kind of big cycle. And so all of these are going to be multiples of 52. And fittingly, the inhabitants of this first sun were all eaten by jaguars. The second sun is 4 wind. That lasted 364 years. That's 7 times 52 years. Why? Well, why not? And the inhabitants died fittingly in a wind year, or in a wind sun, in a hurricane. And then the third sun, that lasted 312 years, 6 times 52 years, and that ended in a rain of fire. And then the final sun, the fourth sun, was 4 water, and that lasted, like the first sun, 13 times 52 years. But that was destroyed by flood, and the inhabitants were turned into fish. Now, each of these each of these suns were aligned with different world directions, to the north, the south, the east, and the west. And so this the first sun is the jaguar sun. We see that there, 4 jaguar, 1, 2, 3, 4. The second sun is 4 wind. And that's the Quetzalcoatl, the god of wind. This is the third sun, the 4 rain. That's Tlaloc, the god of rain. And then they're 4 water. Now, so we're now in the 5th sun. What makes this one different? Well, the previous 4 suns, again, they were associated with the different world directions. So they're off balance. For them, there are 5 cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, and center. This 5th sun, the one that we're currently in, we are safely balanced in the center. There's no need for destruction because we're not off balance. We had to kind of go through these 4 previous phases to get it right. Now, the Maya, I got ahead of myself. So going to the Aztec calendar, this is where really the cataclysm concept came from, was from these Aztec mythologies, from the Leyenda de los Soles. And their main cycle is a 52-year cycle. And the next Aztec cycle that's going to end isn't until October 2nd, 2027. So I just bought you guys at least 15 years, right? So you're going to be okay. But again, it explicitly states that this is the last creation, and there's not even a hint that there's going to be a 6th sun. So this 5th sun is the final sun. Now in the Popol Vuh, we also have talk of previous creations. The first one, now the Quiche, the Popol Vuh is kind of the holy book, a sacred book of the Quiche Maya. We've sometimes, I guess, abused the Popol Vuh and tried to use that as a rubric to read everything from the classic period and even earlier, and try to look for evidence of, basically anytime we find some artwork, we're like, oh, how does that fit in with the Popol Vuh? But again, we need to keep in mind the cultural diversity. This is a local narrative of a local people. Some of them do seem to be shared throughout, but much of it is very, very specific to the Quiche. But anyways, here's part of their creation narrative. The first creation were animals, but because the animals couldn't speak, they couldn't worship the gods, and so they needed to be destroyed. The second creation, the humans were made out of mud or out of wet clay, but they dissolved really easily. They fell apart. They're too weak. They're too fragile. So they needed to try again. So the third creation, humans were made out of wood. The problem with these guys, they could walk around. They're kind of herky-jerky as they walked, but they forgot the gods. And because of that, they were punished by a flood. and for some reason the survivors turned into monkeys. And then finally, we have this final creation, and and those are the ancestors. They're actually made out of maize dough. And even today, the Maya believe that they are the people of the corn. And if you're fluent in Maya, they're like, oh, you're made out of corn. That's great. Right? That there's this concept that the true people are made out of corn. And they know how to worship the gods properly. And so there's no need for them to be destroyed. So again, with the Maya, it's the fourth one that is the safe one. Now, we've got the Quiche Popol Vuh, we've got the Aztec 5 sun myths, but the question is, how accurately do they represent classic Maya cosmology? Now, as I was, I've given this similar presentation before, but I was, adding some new material, and Johan Normark just posted this morning on his blog. It's an excellent blog. He's got several pages dedicated to kind of debunking the 2012 stuff. And he said, we must remember that the Popol Vuh and the Five Suns mythology are from the same time period, the late post-classic, early colonial period, meaning 1500s, 1600s, long after the classic period had collapsed. And they were the result of over 2,000 years of waxing and waning of political systems and the calendars they utilized. So in other words, we can't use them to get necessarily an accurate representation of the early, the classic period Maya cosmology. And then again, the Maya calendar is not the Aztec calendar. And this isn't, we commonly, if you Google Maya calendar, the first thing that pops up is this image right here. You'll see these over and over in all the cartoons that people make about the Maya calendar. This is what you see. But it's truly not even an Aztec calendar. It's a Mexica sunstone. And again, we already looked at some of the details of it. It only mentions some of the dates, but it's not like a complete calendar. It really just has these four suns, and then these four creation periods represented, and then in the sun god in the center, Tonatiuh. So they do share some common elements. The importance of a 260-day cycle, for example. And we won't go into the details on that. But there are some common elements. But the Maya calendar is actually a little bit more complex. Virtually every Maya monument begins with a count of, they're counting back to their creation, but it always begins with a count of 400 years, a count of 20 years, a count of years, a count of 20 days, and a count of days. Then they also give you the count in the 260-day calendar, which I just mentioned. They also had what are known as the 9 lords of the night, so these different deities that presided over different periods. They also had a 7-day cycle represented by glyphs Y and Z. They would tell you which day of the current lunation we are in. In other words, whenever you have a new moon, how many days into that moon are you? They would tell you how many days are in that particular lunation. So some months were 30 days, some were 29. This one is 20 plus 5 plus 4, so 29. And then they also had another 360-day count. They had multiple calendars. 260-day cycle, there's a 20-day cycle, a 260-day cycle, a 360-day cycle, a 365-day cycle. They had an 819-day Venus count. They had a 20-year cycle, a 400-year cycle, multiple cycles, right? It's very, very complex. Now, lest we think their calendar is kind of crazy, I'm just going to skip over this. Let's look at our own calendar. Our days are named after Norse deities. Here's Woden, right? Happy Woden's Day, right? You know who Woden is? So, you guys see Thor? How many saw Thor? Yeah, it's Thor's dad, right? The king of Asgard. That's his day today. All right. Our months are named after Roman deities and numerals. So the beginning of the year, so January is named after Janus, but for some reason December is from the Roman root from decimal 10. So December used to be the 10th month. November is novum is 9. So why is our 11th month and 12th month named 9 and 10? Well, it's because Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus wanted months named after them, so that's why we have July and August, and it pushed the whole calendar back. Our years, of course, count back to Christ, and these are based on a solar cycle, and the months are based on a lunar cycle. And then the way we count our years is based on a positional-based 10 system, and that goes back to Indian or possibly Chinese origin. So in other words, the year 2012, that represents 2 periods of 1,000 years, 0 periods of 100 years, one period of 10 years, and two periods of single years. And then, of course, we're using Arabic numerals. So we've just got this really kind of crazy system. When you really take a step back and look at it, it's just this hodgepodge of different civilizations, gods, numbering systems. It's really kind of a mess. And in comparison, I think the Maya actually look pretty normal. So let's look at their dates a little more carefully. Today's date in their notation system would be 12, 19, 19, 17, 2. So again, what that means is it's 12 times 400 years, and we're counting backwards to this August 13th date. 3114 BC. So 12 times 400 years, so that's a total of 4,800 years, plus 19 times 20 years, or 380 years, plus 19 times 1 year, plus 17 times 20 days, it's 340 days, plus 2 days. And then altogether in their system it would be 5,199 years. Now those are 360-day years. They're not 365-day years. They're not solar years. So that would be about 5,126 of our solar years. And that's one of the Maya great cycles, is this 5,125-year cycles, and that's what's coming to an end, supposedly, on the 23rd. And so today's date, again, 12, 19, 19, 17.2. On the 22nd, the day before all of this, it's going to be 12, 19, 19, 17, 19. Now, this number can't go above 19, this number can't go above 19, this number can't go above 17, and this number can't go above 19. What I mean by that is like when we went from 1999 to the year 2000, where the 999, you can't go higher than 999 in those positions. So if you just add 1 year, it has a domino effect. And so going from this day, December 22nd, to this day, you add a 1 here, but then it carries, and then it carries, and it carries, and it carries, and then you get 13,000. And there's a lot of zeros, and that's very exciting, right? When we had the year 2000, we were very excited, because a lot of zeros. And that's really what got us the most excited, a lot of zeros. And for the Maya, it's the same thing. Hey, cool, a lot of zeros. But it's not like, oh no, no more time. The next day is 13,001, and that's it. I suppose I could end there, but I won't. So, again, the date will be 13,000 for a how, 5 Kankin. Now, this is very similar to the original creation date of 13,000 for a how, 8 Kumku, this August 13th, 3114 day. Now, this creation, I put creation in quotes here because we're not sure exactly what happened on that day. It was kind of an ordering of the cosmos. And at the different cities, they actually give a little bit different account of what happened. So at Kirigua, it talks about the setting up of the 3 thrones, or the 3 stones. There's the jaguar throne, and the water throne, and the snake throne. At Yashchilan, they don't talk about the setting up of thrones. They talk about the beheading of 3 gods. And the narratives are a little bit different, but the date is the same. And so that goes back to what I was talking about, how there are different creation mythologies at these different sites. And so it's hard to create kind of a meta-narrative. And in other words, trying to say all Maya did this. Because the Maya were never unified under a single political system like Egypt, for example. There was never one pharaoh that ruled over all the Maya. Every city-state was an entity unto itself. They each had their own king, who they believed to be a sort of a sacred or a god king. Each one really saw themselves as a separate people. Now, we kind of look at them from our presentist point of view and say, oh, they're similar enough, we can call them all Maya. But they never thought of themselves that way. I guess the best analogy here in Utah would be the difference between BYU and University of Utah. Right? We look at them and say, oh, you guys are the devil because you wear red. And they're like, well, you guys are stupid because you wear blue. Right? But to outsiders, you're just a bunch of, Mormon kids running around. And that's kind of the way it is with the Maya. It's the little differences that you see as a big difference. It's what Freud calls the narcissism of minor differences. And that's what we're dealing with the Maya. Okay, what about this Quetzalcoatl talk? Well, we do have what's known as the Book of Chilambalam of Chumayel, one of many books of Chilambalam. The Book of the Jaguar Priest is what it's sometimes translated as. And it talks about some of these Katun, these 20-year periods. And these different 20-year periods were assigned different omens. And in the particular Katun that we are in, so this is kind of the concept of cyclical time that some people have worried about. It says the Quetzal shall come, the green bird shall come. Cantenal he of the yellow place, shall come. Blood vomit shall come. In other words, a plague will come where people are vomiting blood. Nasty stuff. And then Kukulkan, which is another name for feathered serpent or Quetzalcoatl, shall come with them for a second time. The word of God, the Itzah, that's the name of one of these Maya groups, shall come. And so that sounds pretty, cataclysm and then the descent of a god. Sounds pretty convincing. But like the Popol Vuh, like the Leyenda de los Solis, this is, it's late for one thing. It's post-conquest, meaning after the Spaniards had come. And so there's some influence there. But here's what you need to know, the basics. The Chilambalamba Chumayo was written long after they had abandoned their long count calendar. They were no longer maintaining the system of calendrics. And it was copied over and over, and it's riddled with errors. We know that. There are inconsistencies, obvious influences from the Spaniards, Catholicism. There are prophecies that apply to 20-year periods that repeat every 256 years. This is another one of those big cycles, is 256 years. So in other words, the prophecies that sound like Quetzalcoatl's going to come and return, they were also applicable to from 1992, well, from 92 to 2012, but also between 1736 and 1756. It also applied between 1480 and 1500. So this is if the world was going to end, it would have ended back in 1480 or in 1736, right? Or as early as 1992. And so we can't turn to this and say, oh, look, it's talking about our day, when it's something that was just a repeating cycle. So let's look at what the ancient Maya actually said about December 2012. As I mentioned, there's only 2 monuments that even record the date. One is Tortuguero Monument 6, and the other one was just discovered earlier this year at La Corona. Tortuguero Monument 6, both of these monuments follow what we call Murphy's Law of Epigraphy. Epigraphy is the study of the hieroglyphs, and Murphy's Law of Epigraphy says that the most important glyphs are the ones that are always eroded or broken. And the complete monument, this gives you a sense of how big the monument was originally. It's missing this piece, and then this piece here is the one that contains the date that we're concerned with. So what does it actually say? Well, one of the world's leading epigraphers is David Stewart. He's a professor at UT Austin. He won the MacArthur Genius Grant, I think, when he was 16 years old. Published his first professional paper when he was 11. I mean, this guy is just off the charts brilliant. And back in 2006, he suggested that this particular monument be read this way. Now, before I even read it, I want to let you know that he no longer holds to this translation. This is how he originally translated it. The 13th Baktun will end on 4 Ahau, the 3rd of Uniu, or in other words, Kankin. Something will occur. This is one of those, Murphy's Law things. It will be the descent, perhaps, of the 9 support ? Gods to the something. Right? Not a very solid translation. And I should also mention that we're still in the process of translating the Maya hieroglyphs. We've got about 85% of them translated, but there's still about 15 that resist decipherment. Even the ones that we can, that are clearly drawn, that we can see, that we still just don't know how to read. But that's a discussion for another day. Well, here's what David Stewart says about it now. This is just from a couple months ago. He says, my own opinion is that the Maya said nothing about the upcoming date. There are different opinions among Mayanists as to what the specific glyphs at the end of Tortuguero Monument actually say. And while we differ on our views, I don't think any of us still claim the descent of a god or a group of gods as part of the story. I was actually in a workshop with David, not this past March, but the year before, and we just spent the whole week on this monument trying to figure out what it actually said. And then we get this new monument, and again, you can see very badly eroded. Again, Murphy's Law, and this again mentions this date of December 23rd. And here's what Dr. Stewart says about this monument. While perhaps disappointing to some, the newly found inscription from La Corona has no prophetic message regarding what will happen in 2012. So why only mention the date but say nothing directly about its meaning or significance? Because it's a future station of a big calendar cycle, and so it was seen as worthy of mention in its own right. Ancient Maya scribes like to record the comings and goings of various periods in their calendar, including future ones, because they were intimately tied to their political and religious life. In 2 texts, they tied this future Baktun ending, what's happening on the 21st or 23rd, to their contemporary world, mostly because of interesting numerological patterns that seemed cosmically relevant. In other words, what do these texts actually say? The Tortuguero monument was part of a building dedication back in the mid 7th century AD. And what they were trying to do was place it into the larger cosmological scales of time. It would be of saying, we're dedicating this building, let's say we were to dedicate one this year. We're dedicating this building a mere 988 years before the next millennium. Something along those lines. So here in 2012, we're 988 years away. That's a long ways away. And then that's it. There's no prophecy about anything that's going to happen. It would be like me prophesying. I prophesy that on July 4th, 2076, it will be the tricentennial of the United States of America. That's not much of a prophecy. Right? I'm just saying it will be that date. And I could even get specific. Well, it'll be, in 64 years that's going to happen. Right? Does that make it any more impressive of a prophecy? Not really. So they weren't trying to prophesy. They were just trying to situate themselves in the larger scales of time to bring a heightened importance to what was happening in their day and in their time. Here's Neo, another one of our little memes that's been going around Facebook. What if I told you the Mayan calendar goes past 2012? Well, that's actually true. Do we have dates recorded that go beyond 2012? Yes. Stela 12 from Tikal, for example, has a 19 coefficient peak tune. In other words, when I showed you the monument, it's going to be 130000, they've got things that are 19000 or whatever, 19 whatever. And so their great cycle doesn't go up to 13, it goes up to at least 19. And so that means their cycle is at least 7,500 years long. And so, in other words, their cycle isn't going to end until at least 4410 AD. So I just bought you another couple millennia, so you don't have to worry. And then at Palenque, at the accession of King Pakal, many of you may have heard of Pakal. He's one of the most famous Maya kings there is. His accession is linked to an event 4,100 years in the future, so about the year 4772 AD. So again, I bought you a few millennia there. But interestingly, it also connects to an event 1,236,826 years in the past, long before any of these other cycles were even extant. Now, as far as the calendar running out, it doesn't run out. It never runs out. Well, I shouldn't say never. David Stewart calculated it, and he figured it'll take about 70 octillion years before it could even technically run out. That's the number 70 followed by 27 zeros. So I won't even tell you how much time you've got, right? We've got a long while before anything's going to run out. So in conclusion, December 21st or the 23rd, it's roughly analogous to what January 1st, 2000 was. Lots of zeros, very exciting, not the end of anything. There's only 2 monuments that even mention the date, and they're only doing it in terms of positioning themselves into the greater cycles of time. And what did they say would actually happen on those dates? Nothing. They just said it will be that date and nothing else. And so you can relax, it's not the end of the world. Thank you. All right, I left some time for questions, so